The silver trembled between his calloused fingers, not from weakness, but from restraint. Elijah Gray stared at his reflection in the polished metal, distorted and fractured like memory itself. The forge hissed behind him, a beast demanding to be fed. Outside, Thornwood slept unaware of the ritual repeated nightly in this back room. He traced the pattern he'd engraved curves and angles that came to him in dreams. The metal was cool now, the night's work complete. Still, he couldn't set it down. 5 years since he'd pronounced sentence. 5 years since he'd watched them lower a pine box into Montana soil. 5 years of forging this thing he couldn't name, this object with no purpose except to quiet the voice that whispered in his skull during the darkest hours. A sudden knock startled him. No one came to his forge at this hour. No one. Elijah slipped the silver into his pocket and reached for the pistol beneath his workbench. The knock came again, more urgent this time. "Please," a woman's voice called. "Please help us." The forge hissed and spat as Elijah Gray plunged the bar of silver into its orange heart. Sweat beaded on his weathered face, tracing paths through the soot caked on his skin. His weathered hands, scarred from years of war and years more of toil, worked the bellows with practiced precision. The silver glowed white-hot in the darkness of the workshop, casting harsh shadows against the walls. There was something unnerving about the way he worked, not just the focus of a craftsman, but something deeper, something bordering on obsession. Each hammer strike resonated with purpose. Each twist of the metal executed with the care of a surgeon. "There are mistakes that cannot be undone," Elijah murmured to himself, his voice barely audible over the forge's roar. "Only reforged, reshaped." He struck the glowing metal with deliberate force. By fire. The silver was taking shape now, not as jewelry or decoration, but as something deadlier. A weapon, a gun barrel of pure silver, an object that made no practical sense in a world of steel and iron. Yet he crafted it with the determination of a man possessed, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Outside Thornwood, Montana slept under a blanket of stars. The small town, nestled in the shadow of pine-covered mountains, had long since resigned itself to night, save for the occasional yellow rectangle of a saloon window. And Elijah's forge, of course. Always Elijah's forge, burning late into the night every night for 5 years. The townspeople had learned not to question the taciturn blacksmith who'd arrived half a decade ago. They knew little about him, former army doctor, they whispered. Former judge during the war, others added. What they knew for certain was that he kept to himself, did honest work, and carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd seen too much death to ever fully relax again. What they didn't know, what no one in Thornwood knew, was that every night after finishing his day's work for the townspeople, Elijah Gray retreated to his back room and worked on his true purpose, the silver gun, the impossible weapon that had consumed over a year of his life already. Elijah set his hammer down and examined his work through narrowed eyes. Not yet, not perfect yet. He wiped his brow with a soot-stained rag and reached for the small wooden box on his workbench. From it, he removed a worn carving knife, the handle polished smooth from years of use, the blade sharp enough to split a hair. His expression softened momentarily as he turned the knife in his palm. Then, with practiced movements, he began to carve intricate patterns into a piece of scrap wood. Many people in town had received gifts of Elijah's wood carvings, delicate woodland creatures mostly. Birds in flight, wolves prowling, deer alert in a forest. Always animals, never people. The knife dance was his meditation, his escape from the crushing weight that had driven him to this remote corner of Montana. Away from Washington, away from the war, away from the courts where he'd dispensed what he once believed was justice. As he carved, his mind drifted to the memory he fought daily to suppress. The courtroom, the accused standing ramrod straight in his uniform, the familiar face so like his own but younger, prouder, defiant, even in the face of death. "Marcus Gray, you have been found guilty of treason against the United States of America. The penalty for this crime is death by firing squad. May God have mercy on your soul." The words echoed in his mind as he carved deeper, his knuckles white around the knife handle. His own brother, his own flesh and blood, and he, Elijah Gray, had been the one to sentence him to death. Because the evidence had been irrefutable. Because justice demanded it. Because his oath demanded it. Because he had been a fool. A sudden knock at his door startled him from his reverie. Elijah's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol he kept beneath his workbench. No one came to his forge at this hour. No one. The knock came again, more urgent this time. Elijah set the carving knife down carefully and moved toward the door, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. His hand hovered over the doorknob while the other remained close to his hip, ready to draw if necessary. "Who's there?" he called, his voice rough from disuse. "Please," came a woman's voice strained with desperation. "Please help us." Elijah hesitated only a moment longer before unbolting the door and pulling it open a crack. The light from his forge spilled out onto the face of a woman, young perhaps 30, with dark circles under wide, frightened eyes. She clutched a small girl to her chest, the child's face buried in her mother's shoulder. "Mr. Gray," the woman asked, her gaze darting past him to scan the road behind her. "What do you want?" Elijah asked, not unkindly, but with the wariness of a man unused to visitors. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. This is my daughter, Emma." The woman's voice trembled slightly. "James sent me. James Mitchell. He said you would help us." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I don't know any James Mitchell." Sarah's expression fell, but she reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers. "He said you might say that. He told me to give you this." She extended a folded piece of paper worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and refolded many times. Elijah took it reluctantly, his weathered fingers brushing against hers. "There are men following us," Sarah whispered. "Please, just read it." Something in her tone, the raw fear perhaps, made Elijah step aside. "Come in," he said gruffly. "Quickly." Sarah slipped inside with her daughter, and Elijah closed the door behind them, sliding the bolt back into place. The woman stood awkwardly in his workshop, looking out of place amid the tools and metal and fire. The child Emma peeked out from her mother's embrace, eyeing the glowing forge with wonder rather than fear. Elijah unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the cramped handwriting. Elijah Gray. "You don't know me, but I served under General Hampton during the war. I was there the day they executed your brother. I was there, and I know the truth. Marcus was innocent. The evidence was fabricated on orders from Governor Blackwood and my own brother Robert Mitchell. I've spent years gathering proof, but they've discovered what I'm doing. By the time you read this, I will likely be dead. My wife Sarah carries evidence that will clear your brother's name and expose a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of our government. Trust her. Protect her. Marcus died with honor, maintaining his innocence to the end. You owe it to his memory to uncover the truth. James Mitchell, Captain 7th Cavalry." Elijah's hand shook as he read the final lines. The paper crumpled in his fist as 5 years of carefully constructed certainty cracked and fell away. Marcus, innocent. The words seemed to burn into his mind, searing away the barriers he'd built against his own doubt. "Where is James now?" he asked, his voice hollow. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They killed him 3 weeks ago. Made it look like a robbery, but it was them Blackwood's men. I've been running ever since, trying to stay ahead of them." "And what evidence do you have?" "Not here," Sarah whispered, glancing toward the door. "It's not safe." Elijah moved to the window, carefully pulling back the edge of the curtain to peer into the darkness. The street appeared empty, but his years as a judge had taught him that appearances were often deceiving. Something caught his eye, a flicker of movement near the general store across the way. The glint of moonlight on metal. "You were followed," he stated flatly. Fear flashed across Sarah's face. "I was careful. I swung wide around town, came in through the woods, behind the cemetery." "Not careful enough," Elijah muttered. He moved quickly to his workbench, gathering his pistol and a box of ammunition. "Is there anyone in town you've spoken to? Anyone who might have seen you?" Sarah shook her head. "No one. I came straight here." Elijah nodded curtly. "Good. We need to leave. Now." "Leave," Sarah's voice rose slightly. "But we just got here. Emma needs rest food." "What Emma needs is to stay alive." Elijah cut her off. He gestured toward the letter. "If what this says is true, then the men following you aren't just bounty hunters or hired guns. They're government agents sent to eliminate evidence of a conspiracy." "How can you be sure?" Elijah's eyes darkened. "Because that's what I would have done once upon a time." He moved to the back of his workshop, to a trap door hidden beneath a heavy workbench. With practiced efficiency, he slid the bench aside and lifted the door, revealing a small underground storage area. From it, he withdrew a leather satchel already packed. Sarah watched him with growing understanding. "You've been expecting something like this." "Not this," Elijah said quietly, "but something. The world I left behind doesn't forgive easily." He looked at the small girl still clinging to her mother. "How old is she?" "6," Sarah answered. Elijah's expression softened momentarily as he knelt to the child's level. "Emma, is it? My name is Elijah. We're going to play a game. We need to be very quiet and follow the secret path out of town. Can you do that?" The girl nodded solemnly, her wide eyes reflecting the orange glow of the forge. "Good girl." Elijah stood addressing Sarah again. "There's a tunnel that leads from here to the edge of town. It was used during the war to move supplies. We'll use it now." As he gathered the last few essentials, food, water, and extra blanket, his gaze fell on the silver gun barrel cooling on his workbench. After a moment's hesitation, he wrapped it carefully in cloth and added it to his satchel. "What about your silver gun?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. Elijah looked at her sharply. "How do you know about that?" "I saw you making it," she said simply. "Through the window. Every night when Mom and I walk past. It's pretty." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. They had been watching him perhaps for weeks, studying his habits, his routine. He had grown too comfortable, too predictable. "We need to go," he said more urgently now. "Douse the forge." As Sarah moved to help extinguish the fire, a sudden crack split the night air, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. The window beside them shattered, sending glass shards flying across the workshop floor. "Down," Elijah commanded, pulling both Sarah and Emma to the ground. He crawled to the window, staying below the sill, and peered cautiously over the edge. 3 men had emerged from the shadows, advancing slowly toward the forge. They moved with the coordinated precision of military training, not the chaotic aggression of common criminals. Their clothing was nondescript, the kind specifically chosen not to be remembered, but Elijah recognized the bearing of government men, of men like he had once been. "The tunnel," he whispered, pulling Sarah and Emma toward the trapdoor. "Go. I'll be right behind you." Sarah hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Elijah checked his pistol, his face grim in the dying firelight. "Buy us some time." As Sarah and Emma disappeared into the darkness below, Elijah moved to the far corner of his workshop. There, hanging on the wall, was a worn cavalry coat, not his own, but one he'd kept all these years. He slipped it on, feeling the weight of the past settle across his shoulders. Another shot rang out, splintering the door. Elijah ducked behind his workbench, waiting. The door crashed open, kicked from its hinges by a heavy boot. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, faceless in the gloom. "Federal agents," the man called out. "Elijah Gray, we have a warrant for the woman. Hand her over, and you won't be harmed." Elijah said nothing, calculating distances, angles. The intruder took another step inside his boot, crunching on broken glass. "Gray, we know you're in here. Don't make this difficult." In one fluid motion, Elijah rose from behind the workbench, his pistol leveled at the intruder. "Federal agents don't break down doors in the middle of the night," he said coldly. "And they certainly don't shoot through windows without identifying themselves first." The man froze, clearly not expecting resistance. His hand hovered near his own weapon. "You're interfering with a federal investigation, Gray. That's a hanging offense." "So is murder," Elijah replied. "James Mitchell, did you kill him yourself, or did you just give the order?" Something shifted in the man's posture, surprise perhaps, or concern that Elijah knew more than he should. "I don't know what you're talking about. The woman is wanted for theft and the murder of her husband. We're bringing her to justice." "Justice!" Elijah repeated the word, bitter on his tongue. "I used to believe in that too." Behind the first agent, 2 more shadows appeared in the doorway. Elijah was outnumbered, outgunned. But he had one advantage: he knew his workshop better than they did. "Last chance, Gray," the lead agent warned. "Step aside." Elijah's finger tightened on the trigger. "You know I sentenced 37 men to death during the war. 37 men who broke their oaths, betrayed their country. I believed I was serving justice." His voice hardened. "And then I sentenced my own brother, my own blood, because I believed in a system that you've just proven is corrupt to its core. The agent's patience was wearing thin. Your brother was a traitor, and now you're about to make the same mistake he did. No, Elijah said quietly. My mistake was believing men like you. In one swift movement, he fired not at the agents, but at the chains holding his largest anvil suspended from the ceiling. With a deafening crash, the massive piece of iron plummeted to the floor, crashing through the wooden boards and into the cellar below. The agents scattered, diving for cover. Elijah used the distraction to slip through a narrow side door, a door known only to him concealed behind a rack of tools. He descended a ladder into darkness, pulling the hidden door closed behind him. Below, Sarah waited with Emma, their faces pale in the dim light of the lantern Elijah had stashed there years ago. Are you hurt? Sarah whispered. No, Elijah answered, already moving down the narrow tunnel. But they'll find the trap door soon. We need to hurry. They moved through the darkness, Sarah carrying Emma when the child's pace slowed. The tunnel smelled of earth and old timber, the walls occasionally dripping with groundwater. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a set of wooden steps leading upward to another trapdoor. Elijah paused, listening carefully before pushing it open. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. They emerged at the edge of the forest a half-mile from town. In the distance, Thornwood's scattered lights twinkled like fallen stars. We'll head east, Elijah said, helping Sarah and Emma out of the tunnel. I have a cabin in the mountains. No one knows about it. Sarah nodded, adjusting her grip on her daughter. What about your forge, your life here? Elijah looked back toward town, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. That life was built on a lie. If what your husband wrote is true, if Marcus was innocent, then everything I've believed for the past 5 years has been false. They began the long trek into the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Emma, exhausted, soon fell asleep in her mother's arms. Elijah took the child, carrying her effortlessly as they navigated the difficult terrain. He was your brother, Sarah said softly after they had walked in silence for some time. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been. Elijah's jaw tightened. I sentenced him because I believed in the evidence, because I believed in the system, because I believed that no brother of mine could be a traitor and still look me in the eye without shame. He shook his head. I was a fool. You couldn't have known. I should have, Elijah insisted. He told me he was innocent. With the noose already around his neck, he looked me in the eye and swore he was innocent. And I didn't believe him. His voice cracked slightly. My own brother. They continued in silence as the moon tracked across the sky. By dawn, they had reached a steep ridge overlooking a secluded valley. Nestled among ancient pines stood a small cabin, weathered but sturdy. Smoke curled from its chimney. Elijah halted abruptly. Someone's there. Sarah clutched his arm. The agents. How could they have found us? Not possible, Elijah murmured, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Something wasn't right. The smoke from the chimney rose in a steady, controlled column, not the billowing clouds of a freshly lit fire, but the settled pattern of embers, long tended. Whoever was in his cabin had been there for some time. Stay here, he instructed, gently transferring the sleeping Emma back to her mother's arms. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, head north along the ridge. There's a Blackfoot settlement 2 days' walk from here. And if you don't come back? Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. Elijah removed his carving knife from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. Then you find Julia Redhawk of the Blackfoot. Tell her Elijah sent you. Tell her it's about Marcus. Before Sarah could respond, Elijah was moving down the slope, keeping to the cover of trees and underbrush. He approached the cabin from the rear, noting with professional detachment that no additional tracks led to or from the building. Whoever was inside had covered their trail well. He drew his pistol and moved to the back window, peering carefully through a gap in the curtains. The interior was dimly lit by the fireplace, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. A figure sat in Elijah's rocking chair, facing the door, motionless. Elijah circled to the front, keeping low. The porch steps would creak, they always did so. Instead, he vaulted silently onto the porch and pressed himself against the wall beside the door. With his free hand, he tested the handle. Unlocked. In one swift motion, he flung the door open and dropped to a crouched pistol aimed at the figure in the rocking chair. Federal Marshal, a woman's voice said calmly. I was wondering when you'd arrive, Judge Gray. Elijah's finger froze on the trigger. The woman in his chair wore the distinctive badge of a U.S. Marshal. But it was her face that stopped him cold. Older than he remembered, with new lines around her eyes and mouth, but unmistakable. "Julia!" he breathed. Julia Redhawk smiled thinly, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "It's been a long time, Elijah." Elijah lowered his pistol slowly, confusion warring with suspicion on his face. "What are you doing here? How did you find this place?" "He told me where to find it," Julia said simply, "before they took him away." "Marcus," Elijah's voice caught on the name. "That's impossible. Marcus is dead. I watched them execute him." Julia's dark eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "Are you sure about that, Judge? Are you sure about anything anymore?" Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pines with a sound like distant whispers. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled a long, plaintive cry that seemed to echo Elijah's own confusion and grief. How many more lies had he been told? How many more truths remained hidden in the shadows of his past? And if Marcus was truly innocent, if the foundations of Elijah's justice were built on corruption, what did that make him? Not a judge, not a healer, an executioner. The silence stretched between Elijah and Julia like a chasm too wide to cross. 5 years of unspoken words, accusations, and regrets hung in the air of the small cabin. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the pines, carrying memories Elijah had tried desperately to bury. "You need to bring them in," Julia finally said, nodding toward the window. "The woman and child, they'll freeze out there." Elijah's hand tightened on his pistol. "How do you know about them?" Julia's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "I've been tracking you since you left Thornwood. I watched you escape through the tunnel. Not bad for a city judge." "Why are you following me?" "The same reason those federal agents are," Julia replied, standing smoothly from the rocking chair. She was taller than Elijah remembered, her Blackfoot heritage evident in her high cheekbones and obsidian eyes. The marshal's badge gleamed against her dark coat. "Something big is happening, Elijah. Something that started with Marcus and didn't end with his execution." Elijah holstered his pistol reluctantly. "Stay here," he ordered, though he knew Julia Redhawk had never taken orders well, not even during the war when she'd served as a scout. He returned minutes later with Sarah and Emma, the child now awake and wide-eyed at the sight of the cabin and the stern-faced woman waiting inside. Julia's expression softened slightly when she saw Emma, but hardened again when she turned to Sarah. "You're James Mitchell's widow," she stated. Sarah tensed. "How did you know that?" "Because I've been investigating his murder for the past month," Julia answered. "Officially, it was a robbery gone wrong. Unofficially," she glanced at Elijah, "well, I think the judge here has figured that part out already." Elijah began stoking the fire, his movements deliberate as he processed this new information. "You're saying James Mitchell was assassinated because he discovered something about Marcus's case?" Julia nodded. "Mitchell was a good man, one of the few who questioned the evidence against your brother. He'd been digging into it for years quietly. And he found proof of Marcus's innocence," Sarah interjected, guiding Emma to sit by the fire. "Enough proof that they killed him for it." "What exactly did he find?" Elijah asked, turning to face Sarah fully. Sarah glanced at Julia, hesitant to speak freely in front of someone she just met. Elijah caught the look and nodded reassuringly. "You can trust Julia. She and Marcus were—" He trailed off, unsure how to characterize a relationship that had been complicated even before the war tore everything apart. "We were engaged," Julia finished for him, her voice flat, "before he was arrested, before his own brother sentenced him to die." The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Elijah accepted it without flinching. It was no more than he'd told himself 1,000 times since that day. James discovered communications between Governor Blackwood and several military contractors. Sarah explained, drawing their attention back to the matter at hand. Communications about weapons shipments that were supposed to go to the Union Army, but were diverted elsewhere. Marcus discovered the scheme, threatened to expose it. "So they framed him for treason?" Elijah concluded, the pieces falling into terrible place. "Made it look like he was the one diverting weapons to the Confederacy." Sarah nodded. "James found evidence that the witnesses against Marcus were bribed, that the documents presented at his trial were forged. He compiled it all, kept it hidden." Her hand moved unconsciously to her side. "Sewed into the lining of my dress." Julia's eyebrows rose. You're carrying evidence that could implicate a governor in treason and murder. Not just a governor, Sarah replied grimly. James believed the conspiracy reached all the way to Washington. Senators, cabinet members, people who profited from extending the war. Emma, who had been listening quietly by the fire, suddenly piped up. Papa said the bad men hurt people for money. The adults fell silent, the child's simple summation hanging in the air. After a moment, Elijah knelt beside Emma, his weathered face softening as he met her innocent gaze. Your papa was a brave man, he said gently, and very smart. He tried to stop the bad men. Emma nodded solemnly. That's why they hurt him. Elijah swallowed hard, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. He reached into his pocket and withdrew his carving knife, offering it, handle first, to the child. Would you like to learn how to carve, Emma? While the adults talk, Emma's eyes widened as she took the knife carefully. What can I make? Anything you want, Elijah said, providing her with a small piece of pine from beside the fireplace. Start with something simple. A bird, perhaps. As Emma settled by the fire tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, Elijah stood and motioned for Sarah and Julia to follow him to the far side of the cabin. We need to see this evidence, he said in a low voice. Sarah nodded, reaching for the hidden seam in her dress. With nimble fingers, she extracted several folded documents, crinkling with age and travel. Elijah cleared a space on the small table, and Sarah laid them out carefully. There were letters bearing Blackwood's seal and signature, shipping manifests with notations in a cramped hand, a transcribed telegraph mentioning the Gray problem and instructing that it be handled with the utmost discretion, and finally a signed execution order for Marcus Gray, not the official document Elijah had seen, but an earlier version dated 3 weeks before Marcus's alleged crimes had even been discovered. Elijah's hand trembled as he touched the paper. They planned it, he whispered. They planned his execution before he was even accused. And the order is signed by James's brother Robert Mitchell. Julia noted, pointing to the signature at the bottom. Not by military command, not by the court, by a civilian contractor with ties to Blackwood. Sarah's face was grim. Robert was always ruthless in business, but I never imagined he would be party to murder. Not just murder, Elijah said, his voice hollow. Treason, the very crime they accused Marcus of. He looked up at Julia, his eyes haunted. I sentenced my brother to death for a crime committed by the men who framed him. Julia didn't offer comfort or absolution. Instead, she gathered the documents methodically, her expression unreadable. These are damning, but they're not enough. We need the complete record Mitchell compiled. Where did he hide it? Sarah shook her head. These are all I have. James never told me about any other evidence. There must be more, Julia insisted. Mitchell wouldn't have been killed for just these documents. There has to be something else, something that ties all of this directly to Blackwood and his conspirators in a way that can't be denied or explained away. Elijah stared into the fire memories flashing through his mind. The trial, the evidence presented, the documents that had seemed so irrefutable at the time, and Marcus's final words to him spoken in the cell before his execution. The truth is locked away, brother, but someday someone will find the key. The key, Elijah murmured, understanding dawning. He crossed quickly to his satchel and withdrew the cloth-wrapped silver gun barrel. This is what I've been working on for over a year. I never knew why just that I needed to make it. Pure silver, precise dimensions. Julia eyed the gleaming metal skeptically. A silver gun. What does that have to do with evidence? Not a gun, Elijah corrected, turning the barrel in the firelight. A key. Look at the engravings along the barrel. Sarah and Julia leaned closer. Etched into the silver were intricate patterns, not decorative, but precisely measured grooves and notches forming a complex three-dimensional sequence. Marcus was fascinated by mechanical puzzles, Elijah explained. Even as a boy, he built elaborate contraptions with hidden compartments, always with unique keys. He looked up, conviction growing in his eyes. What if he hid the real evidence somewhere only he could access? Somewhere that requires a specific key. Julia's expression shifted from skepticism to calculation. The hunting lodge, she said suddenly. Marcus had a cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains. We used to go there before. She trailed off, then continued more firmly. He had a workshop there, built all sorts of mechanical oddities. You think that's where he hid something? Sarah asked. It's worth investigating, Julia replied. And we need to move anyway. This cabin isn't safe for long. Blackwood's men will have tracked you from Thornwood by now. Elijah nodded in agreement, already mentally cataloging what they would need for the journey. We'll leave at first light. The Bitterroot Mountains are at least 3 days' ride from here. We don't have horses, Sarah pointed out. No. Julia said, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. But I do. 2 miles east, hidden in a box canyon. I wasn't sure if I'd be bringing you in or helping you escape. She met Elijah's gaze directly. I still haven't decided. Elijah held her gaze. Julia, if Marcus was innocent, he was... She cut him off, her voice leaving no room for doubt. He always was. Then help us prove it, Elijah said simply. Not for my sake, for his. Julia studied him for a long moment, weighing something only she could see. Finally, she gave a terse nod. For Marcus, not for you. As they prepared for the journey ahead, Emma approached Elijah holding out a small wooden carving. It was crude but recognizable, a wolf head raised as if howling. It's for you, she said solemnly. Mama says wolves protect their family. Elijah took the carving, something shifting painfully in his chest as he examined the child's work. Thank you, Emma. It's very good for a first try. You porky turihum. Will we find the men who hurt Papa? Emma asked, her young voice suddenly old with understanding no child should possess. Elijah knelt to her level, choosing his words carefully. We're going to find the truth, Emma. And yes, that means finding the men responsible for what happened to your father. And to my brother. Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. The wolf will help you. He's brave. Elijah slipped the carving into his pocket next to his heart. I'll keep him close. As night fell, they took turns standing watch. During his shift, Elijah sat on the porch, staring into the darkness of the forest. Somewhere out there, men were hunting the men who had killed before and would kill again to protect their secrets. Men who had orchestrated his brother's execution and made Elijah their unwitting executioner. For 5 years he had lived with the weight of his decision, 5 years of believing he had served justice, when in fact he had been justice's executioner. The thought was almost too much to bear. The wolf carving dug into his side, a small sharp reminder of innocence and truth. Elijah withdrew it, turning it in his calloused hands. The crude figure seemed to stare back at him with an accusation. You failed to protect your own brother. Will you fail these innocents too? No, Elijah whispered to the night. Not this time. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the mountains with golden light. They ate a sparse breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared to leave, Elijah took one last look around the cabin that had been his sanctuary and prison for the past 5 years. His gaze lingered on the small shelf where he kept the few possessions he'd brought from his old life, a tarnished pocket watch that had belonged to his father, a worn copy of Blackstone's commentaries, and a daguerreotype of 2 young men in uniform. Himself and Marcus before the war had torn them apart. On impulse, he took the photograph and slipped it inside his coat next to the wolf carving. Then, with resolution hardening his features, he turned to join the others waiting outside. They had a long journey ahead physically and otherwise. But for the first time in 5 years, Elijah Gray was moving toward something, not away from it. Toward truth. Toward justice. Real justice, not the hollow imitation he had dispensed from the bench. Toward redemption, if such a thing were still possible for a man with his brother's blood on his hands. As they set out toward Julia's hidden horses, the rising sun cast their shadows long upon the ground. 4 silhouettes moving through the morning mist, a marshal, a widow, a child, and a man who had been judge, doctor, and blacksmith, but never truly himself. Not until now. Not until the forging fire had begun to reshape him into something new, something that might someday be worthy of forgiveness. The horses picked their way carefully along the narrow mountain trail, hooves clattering on loose shale. Elijah rode in the lead, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit or danger. Behind him, Sarah held Emma securely in the saddle, the child's small hands gripping the pommel with white-knuckled determination. Julia brought up the rear, her marshal's coat buttoned against the growing chill. They had been traveling for 2 days, keeping to the high country, where the dense forest and rocky terrain made tracking difficult. Twice they had spotted dust clouds in the valley below, riders moving with purpose, sweeping the area in organized patterns. Blackwood's men, no doubt, or federal agents under his influence. "We need to stop soon," Sarah called forward, her voice betraying her exhaustion. "Emma needs rest." Elijah glanced back, noting the pallor in the child's face and the droop of her small shoulders. They had pushed hard, too hard perhaps, for a 6-year-old girl who had already endured more than most adults. "There's a place up ahead," he responded, pointing to a craggy outcropping that jutted from the mountainside like the prow of a great stone ship. "Natural cave beneath those rocks. We can rest there for a few hours." Julia moved her horse alongside his, speaking low. "Are you sure it's safe? We're still a day's ride from the Bitterroot." "It's defensible," Elijah replied. "Single approach, good visibility. And we all need sleep if we're going to be any use when we get to Marcus's lodge." Julia nodded grudgingly. 2 hours, no more." The cave proved better than Elijah had remembered, deep enough to conceal them and their horses, with a small freshwater spring trickling from a crack in the rear wall. Once they had secured the horses, Julia took first watch at the entrance, while Elijah helped Sarah make a small fire. Emma, exhausted from the day's ride, curled up on a blanket near the fire and fell asleep almost immediately. Sarah watched her daughter with the vigilant eyes of a mother who had learned the hard way that safety was an illusion. "She's stronger than she looks," Elijah observed, keeping his voice low. Sarah nodded, tucking the blanket more securely around the sleeping child. "She's had to be, since James—" She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "She hasn't cried once, not even when they came for us in the night, not even when we had to leave everything behind." "Children are resilient," Elijah said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. He had seen too many children broken by war, by loss, by witnessing things no innocent eyes should see. "She'll have nightmares," Sarah said quietly. "Not now. Later, when she feels safe enough to let herself remember." Elijah stirred the small fire, watching the sparks rise toward the cave ceiling. "You speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "My father was in the Mexican War. Came back changed. Wouldn't speak of what he'd seen, but he'd wake screaming in the night." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "My mother said the dreams were his mind's way of making sense of things that made no sense." "And did they make sense eventually?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but they came less often. He learned to live with them, I suppose." She looked at Elijah directly. "Do you have nightmares, Judge Gray?" "I don't dream," Elijah replied too quickly. At Sarah's skeptical expression, he amended, "Or if I do, I don't remember them." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Every night since Marcus's execution, Elijah had been haunted by the same recurring dream, his brother standing before him at the gallows, eyes burning with betrayal. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and Emma's steady breathing. From the cave entrance, Julia's silhouette remained vigilant, a dark cutout against the gray mountain light. "She loved him very much," Sarah said suddenly, nodding toward Julia. "Your brother." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Yes. She blames you." "Wouldn't you?" Elijah asked, meeting Sarah's gaze. "I was so convinced of his guilt, so certain that the evidence couldn't lie." His voice grew bitter. "I was a fool." "You were a judge," Sarah countered. "You believed in the system." "A system that failed my own brother," Elijah said. "A system I helped uphold even as it hanged an innocent man." Sarah's expression softened with unexpected compassion. "James believed you didn't know, that you were deceived just as others were." Elijah shook his head. "That doesn't absolve me. I should have looked deeper. I should have questioned more. I should have trusted Marcus when he looked me in the eye and swore his innocence." "And now," Sarah asked quietly, "what will you do now if we find proof?" Elijah's gaze hardened as he stared into the flames. "I'll burn their world to the ground. I'll expose every last one of them, Blackwood, Robert Mitchell, and anyone else involved in the conspiracy." His hand drifted unconsciously to his pocket, where the small wooden wolf Emma had carved rested. "I'll make them pay for what they did to Marcus, to James, to all of us." "Revenge won't bring them back," Sarah said softly. "No," Elijah agreed, "but justice might help them rest easier." Before Sarah could respond, Julia appeared beside the fire, her expression tense. "Riders," she said tersely. "Coming up the trail, 5, maybe 6. Elijah was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his pistol. How far? Half hour at most, Julia replied. They're moving carefully, checking every possible hiding spot. They're tracking us, Elijah concluded grimly. Sarah had already moved to Emma, gently shaking the child awake. We need to go, she whispered urgently. Julia shook her head. No time. They'd spot us on the trail. We need to wait them out. In here, Sarah's voice rose slightly with panic. There's nowhere to hide if they check the cave. Elijah was already moving toward the rear of the cavern, examining the stone walls carefully. There's another way out, he said. A narrow passage that leads to the other side of the ridge. Marcus and I found it when we were boys hunting with our father. Julia frowned. You never mentioned this before. It's tight, Elijah explained, his hands finding a nearly invisible crack in the rock face. We'll have to leave the horses. Emma can make it through, Sarah said, helping her daughter to her feet. But what about us? It widens after the first 20 feet or so. Elijah said, already working to enlarge the opening, pulling aside loose stones and debris that had accumulated over the years. It won't be comfortable, but we can make it. As they worked frantically to clear the passage, the distant sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder. Julia extinguished the fire, scattering the embers and covering them with dirt to hide any trace of their presence. Sarah, you and Emma go first, Elijah instructed, holding out his small lantern. Julia will follow, then me. Sarah hesitated, looking at the narrow, forbidding crack in the stone. What if it's blocked further in? What if we get trapped? Then we'll die fighting, Julia said bluntly, checking her revolver. Rather than hanged as traitors, Emma, who had been silent until now, suddenly tugged at Elijah's sleeve. What about the horses? She asked, her young voice trembling slightly. They'll hurt the horses if they find them. Elijah knelt to her level, struck once again by the child's empathy, even in the face of her own danger. We'll set them free before we go, he promised. They'll run back to their home. This seemed to satisfy Emma, who nodded solemnly. Elijah quickly removed the saddles and bridles from their mounts, slapping each horse on the rump to send them galloping down the mountain trail away from the approaching riders. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder still. Any moment now, their pursuers would spot the fleeing horses and know they were close. Now, Elijah urged, helping Sarah guide Emma into the narrow passage. Quickly! The opening was smaller than he remembered, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through. Sarah went next, her slender frame sliding into the darkness with only minor difficulty. Julia followed her movements, efficient despite the tight space. Elijah was about to enter when a shout echoed from the trail outside. Tracks lead here, check the cave. He froze, torn between following the others and staying to delay their pursuers. The decision was made for him when the first rider appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the gray daylight. In here, Hannah, the man called over his shoulder. Then, spotting Elijah in the shadows, hold it right there. Elijah drew his pistol in one fluid motion, firing twice. The first shot went wide, but the second caught the rider in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a cry of pain. Elijah used the moment to dive into the passage, scraping his shoulders raw as he squeezed through the narrow opening. Behind him, angry voices filled the cave. A bullet ricocheted off the rock near his head, showering him with stone fragments. Elijah pressed forward, feeling his way in near total darkness. Ahead, he could just make out the faint glow of the lantern Sarah carried. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow he had to turn sideways to progress. His lungs burned with the effort, and every breath filled his nostrils with the musty scent of ancient stone. Behind him, he could hear their pursuers trying to follow, cursing, as they realized the passage was too small for most of them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of claustrophobic darkness, the passage widened into a small chamber. Sarah, Emma, and Julia waited there, the lantern casting their faces in sharp relief against the darkness. Are you hurt? Sarah asked, noting the blood on Elijah's sleeve, where the rock had scraped his skin raw. I'm fine, he assured her, but they know we're in here. At least one of them was slim enough to follow. Julia hefted her revolver. Let them come. The narrow passage makes it a killing ground. Elijah shook his head. We need to keep moving. The main tunnel continues that way. He pointed to a larger opening on the far side of the chamber. It comes out near a waterfall on the eastern face of the mountain. They pressed on, moving as quickly as they dared through the winding passage. The air grew cooler, fresher, and soon they could hear the distant roar of falling water. Light appeared ahead, a jagged opening in the rock face partially concealed by vegetation. Elijah pushed aside the curtain of vines, blinking in the sudden brightness. They emerged onto a narrow ledge, with the waterfall thundering down to their right. 50 feet below, a deep pool gathered the falling water before continuing downward as a swift-flowing stream. "Now what?" Sarah asked, clutching Emma close as she peered over the edge. "We can't climb down with Emma." Before Elijah could answer, a shot rang out behind them. The bullet struck the rock wall inches from Julia's head. She dropped to a crouch, returning fire into the tunnel entrance. "We need to jump," Elijah said, pointing to the pool below. "The water's deep enough." Sarah blanched. "Emma can't swim." "I'll take her," Elijah assured her. "I've done this before as a boy. The current is strong but manageable." Another shot from the tunnel lent urgency to his words. Julia fired again, her expression grim. "I'm almost out of ammunition. Make a decision, Gray." "Emma, come here," Elijah said, kneeling before the frightened child. "I'm going to carry you down to the water. It's like a game. We'll hold our breath and splash down, then swim to the shore. Can you be brave?" Emma nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear. "Like the wolf," she whispered, reminding Elijah of the carving she had made him. "Just like the wolf," he agreed, lifting her securely in his arms. "Now hold tight and don't let go until I tell you." He turned to Sarah and Julia. "Follow right after us. Don't hesitate." Without waiting for a response, Elijah backed up several paces, then ran forward and leaped from the ledge. For a heart-stopping moment, they were suspended in open air, the waterfall's spray cool against their faces. Then gravity claimed them, and they plummeted toward the pool far below. The impact with the water was jarring, driving the breath from Elijah's lungs. He kept a firm grip on Emma as they sank beneath the surface, the roar of the waterfall suddenly muted. With powerful kicks, he propelled them upward, breaking the surface with a gasp. Emma clung to him, sputtering but conscious. "Good girl," he encouraged, swimming toward the rocky shore with strong, one-arm strokes. "You're doing wonderfully." Above, he saw Sarah leap from the ledge, her skirts billowing around her as she fell. Julia followed a moment later, her coat streaming behind her like dark wings. Both women hit the water with clean dives, resurfacing quickly to swim toward Elijah and Emma. Dragging themselves onto the shore, they lay for a moment, catching their breath. The waterfall thundered beside them, its spray creating a perpetual mist that refracted the sunlight into countless tiny rainbows. "They won't follow," Julia said, wringing water from her long black hair. "Not that way, but they'll circle around, try to cut us off." Elijah nodded, helping Emma to her feet. The child was shivering, but her eyes were bright, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "We need to keep moving. The Bitterroot Range is still ahead, but at least we've thrown them off our trail for now." They set off along the stream, moving as quickly as their soaked clothing and exhaustion would allow. Without horses, the journey would take longer than expected, but Elijah was familiar enough with these mountains to find game trails and shortcuts unknown to their pursuers. As they walked, Emma fell into step beside Elijah, her small hand finding his larger one with surprising trust. "Was that where you and your brother played when you were little?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly over the gurgle of the stream. Elijah glanced down momentarily, taken aback by the question. "Yes," he said after a pause. "Marcus and I explored these mountains every summer. Our father would bring us hunting, but we were more interested in finding caves and climbing rocks than tracking deer." "Siri, was he nice to your brother?" The question, so innocent and direct, struck Elijah like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. "Yes," he finally managed. "Marcus was kind, clever, always curious about how things worked." "Mama says my papa was clever too," Emma said solemnly. "She says that's why the bad men hurt him." Elijah squeezed her small hand gently. "Your papa was very brave. He tried to right a terrible wrong. And now you're trying to help him." Emma concluded with a child's simple logic. "That's good. Mama says we should always help people who need it. Your mom is very wise." Elijah said, his gaze traveling to where Sarah walked ahead with Julia, the two women talking in low voices. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Will you teach me more about carving when we're safe?" Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the weight of the past bearing down on his shoulders, Elijah felt a small smile tug at his lips. "I'd like that, Emma. I'd like that very much. By nightfall, they had covered several miles following the stream down into a densely wooded valley. With no dry materials for a fire, they made camp beneath the sheltering branches of a massive pine. The night air was cold, but at least the rain that had threatened all afternoon held off. "We should reach the Bitterroot by tomorrow evening," Elijah said as they shared the meager rations from Julia's saddlebag, all they had managed to salvage before abandoning the horses. Marcus's lodge is near the northern edge overlooking Spirit Lake. "And you're sure it's still there?" Sarah asked. "After all these years," Julia answered before Elijah could. "It's there. I checked 6 months ago." Elijah looked at her sharply. "You've been to the lodge recently?" Julia's expression remained impassive. "I go every year, on the anniversary." She didn't need to specify which anniversary. The date of Marcus's execution was etched into both their memories with the permanence of a brand. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elijah asked, a note of accusation in his voice. "Why would I?" Julia countered, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight filtering through the branches. "You made your choice, Gray. You chose your precious law over your own blood, over the truth. I believed I was serving justice," Elijah insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You believed what was convenient to believe," Julia retorted. "Marcus tried to tell you, I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen." "Enough," Sarah interjected sharply, nodding toward Emma, who was watching the adults with wide, worried eyes. "This helps no one." Julia held Elijah's gaze for a moment longer, then looked away, her jaw tight with unspoken recriminations. The tension between them was a tangible thing, 5 years of grief and blame compressed into the small space between their bodies. "I'll take first watch," Julia said curtly, moving to perch on a fallen log at the edge of their makeshift camp. As Sarah settled down with Emma, the child's head pillowed on her mother's lap, Elijah found himself too restless for sleep. His mind raced with questions, with possibilities both hopeful and terrible. If they found evidence at the lodge, real, irrefutable evidence of Marcus's innocence, and the conspiracy that had condemned him, what then? Would it change anything? Would it bring his brother back? Would it ease the crushing weight of guilt that had been Elijah's constant companion for 5 long years? Unable to sit still with these thoughts circling like vultures, Elijah moved to sit beside Julia, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "He tried to contact you," Julia said after a long silence, her voice so low it barely carried over the whisper of wind in the pines. "After—" Elijah froze, his heart suddenly hammering in his chest. "What?" Julia continued staring into the darkness, her profile sharp in the dim starlight. "Marcus, after the execution. After you thought he was dead." "That's impossible," Elijah whispered, though a terrible hope was already blooming in his chest. "I saw the firing squad. I saw him fall." "You saw what you were meant to see," Julia replied. "What everyone was meant to see." "Julia, for God's sake, what are you saying?" Finally, she turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of anger, pain, and something that might have been pity. "Marcus is alive, Elijah, or at least he was a year ago." The world seemed to tilt beneath Elijah, the ground suddenly unstable. "How? You," Julia said simply. "You switched the ammunition in the firing squad's rifles. Replaced the real bullets with blanks. Don't pretend you don't remember." And suddenly he did. The memory crashed over him like a wave, breaking through the carefully constructed wall he had built in his mind. The night before the execution, sneaking into the armory. The desperate, half-formed plan. The hope that somehow, if Marcus could survive the firing squad, he might escape, might find a way to prove his innocence. "I thought it failed," Elijah whispered, his voice breaking. "He fell. There was blood." "Blood packs," Julia explained. "Sewn into his shirt. My people helped. The Blackfoot have been helping escaped slaves and political prisoners for years." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Did you think you were the only one with a plan to save him? But after they buried him, I saw the grave." "An empty coffin," Julia corrected. By then, Marcus was already miles away, with a new identity, a new life. Elijah's mind reeled with this revelation. All these years he had lived with the belief that he had sent his own brother to his death. It had hollowed him out, leaving nothing but a shell filled with guilt and regret. And now to learn that Marcus was alive, that his desperate gambit had actually succeeded, it was almost too much to comprehend. Why didn't he tell me? Elijah asked, raw emotion, making his voice rough. Why let me believe he was dead? Julia's expression hardened. Because you betrayed him, Elijah. You sat in judgment and condemned him despite his pleas. Despite the evidence of your own heart. He couldn't forgive that. The words struck Elijah like physical blows. But I tried to save him. I risked everything. Too little, too late. Julia cut him off. You should have believed him from the start. You should have been his brother before you were a judge. Elijah had no answer to that. She was right, of course. He had failed Marcus in the most fundamental way. He had doubted him when faith was most needed. Is he? Elijah struggled to form the question. Will he be at the lodge? Julia shook her head. No, he doesn't go there anymore. Too dangerous. Then where is he, Julia? I need to see him. To explain. He doesn't want your explanations, Julia said flatly. He doesn't want to see you at all. The rejection, though expected, still cut deep. Then why tell me he's alive? Why now? Julia was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the darkness beyond their small camp. Because he wants you to find the evidence, she finally said. Because James Mitchell was right there, is proof at the lodge that could bring down Blackwood and his entire network. Proof that Marcus couldn't access himself without risking capture. The silver key, Elijah murmured, understanding dawning. That's why I've been compelled to forge it all this time. Somehow, Marcus found a way to plant the idea in my mind. Julia nodded. The design came to you in a dream, didn't it? A recurring dream about a silver gun that wasn't really a gun at all. Yes, Elijah admitted, wondering now if all his nightmares had been messages from his brother, attempts to communicate across the gulf that separated them. But how did he do it? Marcus has changed, Julia said carefully. His time with my people, with the Blackfoot medicine men, it's given him insights abilities that might seem strange to you. She paused, then added cryptically, the white wolf sees paths others cannot. Before Elijah could press for clarification, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Julia was on her feet, instantly, revolver drawn. Elijah mirrored her movement, pistol in hand, as he scanned the surrounding forest. For several tense heartbeats, nothing moved. Then at the edge of visibility, a shape detached itself from the deeper shadows, canine, massive, its fur catching the starlight like freshly fallen snow. A wolf. A white wolf, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that seemed almost human as it regarded them from the safety of the trees. Marcus. Elijah whispered the name, escaping his lips before he could stop it. The wolf made no sound, no movement to acknowledge the name. It simply watched them with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and melted back into the forest, leaving only disturbed underbrush as evidence it had ever been there. Was that, Elijah began, but Julia silenced him with a sharp gesture. Don't ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to, she said softly. Just know that Marcus is watching. He's always been watching. The revelation left Elijah shaken, his worldview tilting once again. The brother he had mourned for 5 years was alive. More than alive, transformed in ways Elijah couldn't begin to comprehend. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the years of silence, Marcus had reached out to him, had guided his hands in forging the silver key, had led him to this moment, this quest for truth and redemption. Morning brought a cold drizzle that penetrated even the thick canopy of pine branches sheltering their camp. They ate the last of their rations in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma, despite the hardships, maintained a resilient spirit that humbled Elijah. She chattered about the white wolf she had glimpsed in her dreams, unaware of the significance the creature held for the adults. "Mama, I saw a big white wolf last night," she said as Sarah helped her button her coat. "He was beautiful, and he wasn't scary at all." Sarah smiled indulgently. "That sounds like a nice dream, sweetheart." "It wasn't a dream," Emma insisted. "He was right there in the trees. He was watching over us." Sarah's eyes met Elijah's over the child's head, a question in them. Elijah gave a nearly imperceptible nod, confirming the wolf's visit had been real. Sarah's expression shifted to one of wonder, then concern. "Well, it's good to have someone watching over us," she said carefully, smoothing Emma's hair. "Now, are you ready for another day of walking?" They set off through the dripping forest, following a game trail that Elijah assured them would lead toward the Bitterroot Mountains. The rain made travel miserable, soaking through their already damp clothes and turning the trail to mud. Emma trudged bravely alongside her mother, but Elijah could see the child's strength flagging. "Here," he said, kneeling beside her. "Climb on my shoulders. You can be my lookout." Emma brightened at this suggestion, allowing Elijah to hoist her onto his broad shoulders. From this perch, she could see above the underbrush, her small hands gripping Elijah's hair for balance. "I can see the mountains," she announced proudly. "They're all misty like in a fairy tale." "That's where we're going," Elijah told her. "To a special place my brother built long ago." "Where the white wolf lives?" Emma asked innocently. Elijah exchanged a glance with Julia, who walked slightly ahead. "Perhaps," he answered carefully. "We'll have to wait and see." They walked for hours, stopping only briefly to rest and drink from clear mountain streams. By mid-afternoon, the rain had ceased, and patches of blue sky appeared between the clouds. The terrain grew steeper, the forest giving way to rocky slopes dotted with scrub pine and mountain laurel. "We're close," Julia announced as they crested a ridge overlooking a pristine mountain lake, its surface a perfect mirror, reflecting the surrounding peaks. "Spirit Lake. The lodge is on the northern shore beneath that outcropping of rock." Elijah shaded his eyes, scanning the shoreline. At first he saw nothing but trees and stone. Then, almost hidden amongst the pines, he glimpsed a structure, a cabin built of logs and native stone, its roof covered in moss that made it nearly invisible against the landscape. "Marcus always did have an eye for hiding places," he murmured, feeling a strange tightness in his chest at this tangible connection to his brother. They descended the ridge, carefully alert for any sign of pursuit. But the wilderness around them remained peaceful, disturbed only by the occasional cry of a hawk or the rustle of wind through the pines. As they approached the lodge, Elijah helped Emma down from his shoulders, setting her gently on her feet. "Stay close to your mother now," he instructed. "The cabin might not be safe. There could be traps." "Marcus wouldn't hurt a child," Julia objected. "No," Elijah agreed, "but he might have set precautions against uninvited visitors. I would have in his position." The cabin's entrance was a heavy wooden door, weathered but solid. No lock was visible, only a curious metal plate set into the wood at about chest height. Elijah examined it carefully, noting the intricate pattern of grooves and indentations that matched those on the silver barrel he had forged. "This is it," he said softly, withdrawing the silver key from his satchel. "This is what I've been making all these months." With steady hands, he aligned the silver barrel with the plate, feeling a faint click as the grooves matched perfectly. Then, following an instinct he couldn't quite explain, he pressed and turned the barrel clockwise. The mechanism engaged with a series of soft metallic sounds like the workings of a fine clock, and the door swung inward on well-oiled hinges. The interior of the lodge was dim, but not dark, illuminated by narrow windows set high in the walls. It was a single large room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple furnishings scattered throughout. But what immediately drew their attention was the massive contraption occupying the center of the space, a complex assembly of gears, wheels, and metal arms that resembled nothing so much as the inner workings of a gigantic clock. "What is it?" Sarah breathed, staring at the machine in wonder. "A puzzle box," Elijah answered, approaching the device with reverent caution. "Marcus was obsessed with them as a boy. This is just on a much larger scale." Julia remained by the door, her expression unreadable as she watched Elijah circle the mechanism. "He called it the Justice Engine," she said quietly. "He built it in the months before his arrest, when he first discovered Blackwood's conspiracy." Elijah examined the machine closely, noting the numerous keyholes and dials positioned at strategic points throughout its structure. "It's a vault," he realized. "A vault with multiple locks, each requiring a specific key. And we only have one," Sarah observed, her voice tinged with disappointment. "No," Julia contradicted, stepping forward. From beneath her coat, she withdrew a small metal object, a brass cylinder etched with the same intricate patterns as Elijah's silver key. "We have two." Elijah stared at her in surprise. "You've had that all along. Why didn't you use it?" "Because it only works in conjunction with yours." Julia explained, positioning the brass key before a specific keyhole on the western face of the machine. "Marcus designed it that way deliberately. The evidence can only be accessed when his brother and his lover work together." A bitter smile twisted her lips. His idea of poetic justice, I suppose. Elijah moved to stand beside her, silver key in hand. Where does mine go? Julia pointed to a keyhole on the opposite side of the mechanism. There. We insert them simultaneously, then turn them clockwise exactly 3/4 of a rotation. What happens then? Sarah asked, holding Emma close, as if fearing the machine might explode. I don't know, Julia admitted. Marcus never told me. He only said that when the time was right, the truth would be revealed. Elijah positioned his silver key before the designated lock, his heart hammering in his chest. On three, he instructed Julia. 1, 2, 3. They inserted their keys in perfect unison, feeling the slight resistance as the mechanisms engaged. Then together they rotated the keys 3/4 turned to the right. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a soft whirring sound, the gears of the justice engine began to turn. Wheels spun, counterweights shifted, and a complex dance of mechanical parts unfolded before their astonished eyes. The machine operated with surprising quietness, each component moving with precision that spoke of Marcus's extraordinary craftsmanship. As the final gear completed its rotation, a hidden compartment at the heart of the mechanism slid open, revealing a metal strongbox. Elijah reached for it with trembling hands, lifting it carefully from its nest of gears and springs. The box was surprisingly heavy, made of polished steel with no visible lock or opening. How do we open it? He wondered aloud. As if in answer, a small depression appeared in the top of the box, a perfect fit for the head of the silver key still protruding from the machine. Elijah carefully removed the key and pressed it into the depression. The lid of the box clicked open, revealing its contents. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, several folded documents bearing official seals, and a daguerreotype similar to the one Elijah carried, two young men in uniform arms around each other's shoulders. Brothers united before war and betrayal tore them apart. With careful hands, Elijah lifted out the journal, opening it to the first page. The handwriting was familiar, Marcus's bold, slanting script, unchanged from the letters he had sent during the war. If you are reading this, brother, then you have finally discovered the truth I tried to tell you. Or perhaps you knew all along and lacked only the courage to act. Either way, the evidence contained herein will expose the greatest conspiracy our nation has ever faced, a cabal of powerful men who prolonged the war for profit, who diverted weapons meant for our soldiers, who framed me when I discovered their treachery. Their names and crimes are detailed within, along with proof that cannot be disputed or denied. Whether you use this evidence for justice or for vengeance, I leave to your conscience. Mine is clear. Marcus Gray. Elijah's hand shook as he turned the pages, scanning the meticulously documented evidence of Blackwood's crimes. Names leapt out at him, senators, generals, industrialists, all implicated in a vast conspiracy of weapons trafficking and war profiteering that had cost countless lives and nearly torn the nation apart. This is it, he breathed, looking up at Julia and Sarah. This is everything we need to bring them down, all of them. A sudden noise from outside the cabin froze them all in place, the distant but unmistakable sound of horses approaching. They've found us, Julia said grimly, moving to the window to peer out cautiously. At least 6 riders coming fast. Blackwood's men, Sarah whispered, clutching Emma closer. Or federal agents, Elijah replied quickly, gathering the documents in journal, shoving them into his satchel. Either way, we can't let them find this evidence. Julia checked her revolver, her expression hardening into the mask of a woman who had faced death before and was prepared to do so again. There's a back exit. Tunnel runs beneath the east wall, comes out behind that stand of pine about 100 yards downslope. You take Sarah and Emma, Elijah instructed, withdrawing his own pistol. I'll hold them off, buy you some time. No, Julia countered sharply. We need you alive. You're the one who understands these documents, who can testify to their authenticity. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment the anger that had simmered between them softened into something like respect. Besides, Marcus would never forgive me if I let you get yourself killed before he had the chance to tell you exactly what he thinks of you. Despite the dire circumstances, Elijah felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. He always did insist on having the last word. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied now by the shouts of men. They had perhaps 2 minutes, no more. The tunnel, Julia urged, already shepherding Sarah and Emma toward a bearskin rug near the fireplace. She pulled it aside to reveal a trapdoor set into the wooden floor. Quickly! Sarah helped Emma down the narrow ladder first, then followed. Julia motioned for Elijah to go next. "What about you?" he asked, hesitating at the opening. "Right behind you." She promised, moving to retrieve something from beneath a loose floorboard near Marcus's mechanical vault. It was a small metal cylinder, similar to a dynamite stick, but more sophisticated in design. "What is that?" Elijah asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Insurance," Julia replied grimly. "Marcus built this place to protect his secrets. If necessary, it can destroy them too." Understanding dawned in Elijah's eyes. "An explosive, Julia, you can't—" "It's what Marcus would want." She cut him off. "Now go." Reluctantly, Elijah descended the ladder into darkness. The tunnel was low-ceilinged, but wider than he had expected, shored up with timber supports at regular intervals. Sarah and Emma waited a few yards ahead, their faces pale in the dim light filtering down from the cabin above. Julia followed quickly, pulling the trapdoor closed behind her. From her pocket, she produced a small phosphorus match, striking it against the rough stone wall to illuminate their surroundings. "This way," she directed, leading them forward. "Stay low and move quickly." They half ran, half crawled through the narrow passageway, the earthen floor cold and damp beneath their hands and knees. Emma, small enough to stand upright, kept pace admirably, her earlier exhaustion apparently forgotten in the excitement of their escape. Behind them, muffled by earth and timber, came the sounds of the cabin being breached. Booted feet shouted commands, the crash of furniture being overturned in search of hidden compartments or documents. "They won't find anything," Julia murmured, more to herself than to the others. Not now. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, turning and descending in a disorienting pattern that had clearly been designed to confuse pursuers. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was probably no more than 5 minutes, they reached another ladder leading upward. "We're directly beneath the pine stand," Julia explained. "The exit is concealed by undergrowth. I'll go first. Make sure it's clear." She ascended swiftly, pushing open a camouflaged hatch and peering cautiously outside. After a moment, she motioned for the others to follow. One by one, they emerged into the cool mountain air, finding themselves in a dense thicket of young pines that provided excellent cover from the cabin above. "Now what?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heart. "They'll find the tunnel eventually." "Not if I can help it," Julia said, her hand moving to her pocket where she had stashed the explosive device. From this position, they could just see the roof of the cabin through the trees and the horses of their pursuers tethered outside. With practiced precision, Julia withdrew a small clockwork mechanism from her other pocket and attached it to the cylinder. "Timer," she explained briefly, "gives us 10 minutes to get clear." "Julia, wait," Elijah protested. "That's Marcus's home. His work. Are you sure?" "It's just a place," Julia cut him off. "The important things are safe." She nodded toward the satchel containing the documents. "This is what matters. This is what Marcus risked everything for." Before Elijah could object further, Julia twisted the timing mechanism and tossed the device back down the tunnel. It landed with a soft thud on the earthen floor, the faint ticking of its clockwork barely audible. "We need to move," she said, already turning to lead them deeper into the forest. "When that explodes, it will collapse the entire tunnel system and possibly take the cabin with it. Anyone still inside?" She let the implication hang in the air, her expression unreadable. They moved swiftly through the underbrush, angling away from the cabin and toward the western shore of Spirit Lake. Emma, despite her youth, kept pace admirably, sensing the urgency, even if she didn't fully understand the danger. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as they ducked beneath a low-hanging branch. "There's a Blackfoot hunting camp on the far side of the lake," Julia replied. "We'll find help there. Horses, supplies." Elijah frowned. "How do you know they'll still be there?" "It's late in the season for hunting." Julia shot him a sidelong glance. "Because I told them to wait for us. I've been planning this for months, Gray. Ever since Mitchell first reached out to me with his suspicions. And the revelation shouldn't have surprised Elijah, but it did. While he had been forging his silver key in isolation, believing himself guided by some inexplicable instinct, Julia had been orchestrating a complex plan of evidence recovery and escape. "You knew I would come," he said slowly. "You knew about Sarah and Emma." "I knew Mitchell had found evidence," Julia corrected. I knew he had contacted you before he died. The rest was educated guesswork. Before Elijah could press for more details, a tremendous explosion shattered the quiet of the mountain forest. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a cloud of dust and debris erupted from the direction of the cabin. Birds scattered from the trees, their alarmed cries piercing the air. "Right on time," Julia remarked grimly. "That should slow them down considerably." Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. "Was that thunder? Something like that, sweetheart?" Sarah soothed, though her own face was pale with shock. "Nothing to worry about now." They continued their flight through the forest, the sound of the explosion still ringing in their ears. Elijah's mind raced with questions with implications. The evidence in his satchel could bring down not just Governor Blackwood, but an entire network of corrupt officials and war profiteers. It could clear Marcus's name, expose the conspiracy that had framed him, bring justice to James Mitchell's killers. But at what cost? How many more would die before this was over? How many more lives would be destroyed in the pursuit of truth? As if reading his thoughts, Julia spoke without turning. "Whatever you're thinking, Grace, stop. This isn't about you or your guilt or your redemption. This is about justice, real justice, not the kind you dispense from your bench." "I know that," Elijah replied, stung by the accuracy of her assessment. "But these men, Blackwood, Robert Mitchell, whoever else is involved, they won't surrender their power without a fight. They've killed to protect their secrets before. They'll kill again." "That's why we need to make the evidence public," Sarah interjected. "All of it all at once. So they can't cover it up or dismiss it as the ravings of a condemned traitor." "And how do we do that?" Elijah asked. "Every newspaper, every court, every government office in the territory is under Blackwood's influence." "Not every newspaper," Julia corrected. "The Blackfoot Sentinel is run by my cousin. It's small, but it's independent, and it has connections to larger papers in Chicago and New York." "It's a start," Elijah conceded, "but we'll need more. Testimony from witnesses, corroboration of the documents. Your word and mine won't be enough, not against men like Blackwood." "Actually," Sarah said, her voice thoughtful, "there might be another way." She hesitated, then continued more confidently. "James wasn't just collecting documents. He was recording conversations." Both Elijah and Julia stopped in their tracks, turning to stare at her. "What do you mean recording?" Elijah asked. Sarah reached into the bodice of her dress, withdrawing a small metal device about the size of a pocket watch. Edison's new phonograph cylinder, miniaturized by a German engineer James met during the war. It can record up to 2 minutes of conversation when activated. Elijah took the device with careful hands, examining it with wonder. "And James used this to record Blackwood Robert Mitchell." "Several times," Sarah confirmed. "The cylinders are hidden in the lining of my trunk, which is currently in the possession of Robert Mitchell, ironically enough. He had it seized when he accused me of stealing from James's estate after his death. So the evidence we need to corroborate the documents is sitting in Robert Mitchell's own home?" Julia summarized, a predatory smile spreading slowly across her face. "That's perfect. Perfect, but inaccessible," Elijah pointed out. "Mitchell's estate is like a fortress. Guards, dogs, the latest security measures." "You forget who you're traveling with," Julia replied coolly. "Before I was a marshal, I was a spy for the Union. Infiltration is something of a specialty." Before Elijah could respond, the distant sound of shouts and crashing underbrush reached them. Their pursuers, having survived the explosion, were now tracking them through the forest. "They're persistent. I'll give them that," Julia muttered, increasing her pace. "Come on, the lake is just ahead." They broke through the tree line moments later, finding themselves on the rocky shore of Spirit Lake. The water stretched before them, mirror smooth in the late afternoon light, reflecting the surrounding mountains with perfect clarity. On the far shore, perhaps a mile distant, smoke rose from what appeared to be a small encampment, the Blackfoot hunters Julia had mentioned. "We'll never make it around the lake before they catch us," Sarah observed, her voice tight with fear. "We're not going around," Julia replied, moving toward a dense stand of reeds near the water's edge. "We're going across." With practiced efficiency, she pushed aside the reeds to reveal a small, well-concealed canoe, a traditional Blackfoot design made of stretched hides over a wooden frame light enough to be carried by a single person, but stable enough to carry several. "Another part of your plan," Elijah asked, impressed despite himself. Julia shrugged. I like to be prepared. She began pushing the canoe toward the water. Help me with this. It's light but awkward. Together, they slid the craft into the lake, steadying it as Sarah and Emma climbed aboard. The canoe rode low in the water with their combined weight, but remained stable, a testament to its builder's skill. I'll take the stern, Julia said, positioning herself at the rear with a single paddle. Gray, you're stronger, you take the bow. Elijah complied without argument, settling himself at the front of the canoe and gripping the second paddle. It had been years since he had handled such a craft, but the rhythm of paddling came back to him quickly, a muscle memory from childhood summers spent on the lakes of Montana with his father and brother. They pushed off from shore just as their pursuers emerged from the forest behind them. A shout went up, followed by the crack of a rifle shot. The bullet struck the water several yards to their right, sending up a small fountain of spray. Keep paddling. Julia ordered, her own strokes powerful and precise. They're too far for accurate shooting, especially from horseback. Another shot rang out, this one coming closer, but still missing the canoe. Elijah and Julia redoubled their efforts, their paddles dipping and pulling in perfect synchronization as they drove the small craft across the open water. Look, Emma suddenly cried, pointing toward the far shore. Following her gesture, they saw movement among the trees, figures emerging from the Blackfoot camp, alerted by the sound of gunfire. Several men were launching canoes of their own, paddling swiftly toward them. Friends of yours? Elijah asked Julia, his breath coming in short gasps from the exertion of paddling. Better, Julia replied, a fierce smile lighting her face. Family. The approaching canoes, three of them each carrying two warriors, moved with impressive speed, their occupants clearly experienced in navigating the mountain lake. Behind them on the shore, more figures gathered, some armed with rifles that gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Another shot from their pursuers whistled overhead, uncomfortably close. Emma whimpered, pressing herself against her mother's side. Just a little further, Sarah encouraged, her arm protective around her daughter. Help is coming. The Blackfoot canoes intercepted them near the middle of the lake, forming a protective barrier between them and the distant shore, where Blackwood's men continued to fire sporadically. One of the warriors, a tall man with a face bearing the ceremonial scars of a Blackfoot war chief, raised his hand in greeting. Julia, he called, his deep voice carrying clearly across the water. You bring trouble as always. Oh, hello, Father. Julia replied, her tone warm, despite the circumstances. Sorry about the reception committee. Elijah's paddle faltered mid-stroke. Father, he repeated, staring at the imposing figure in the lead canoe. Chief Joseph Redhawk. Julia confirmed, not breaking her paddling rhythm. My father, also the man who helped save your brother's life. Before Elijah could process this revelation, the chief gestured toward the shore behind them. More riders coming. We should return to camp. With the additional protection of the Blackfoot canoes, they made it safely to the far shore, where a welcoming committee of warriors and women awaited them. Elijah helped Sarah and Emma from the canoe, then offered his hand to Julia, a gesture she ignored, climbing ashore with practiced ease. Chief Redhawk greeted them formally, his weathered face solemn beneath the eagle feathers adorning his hair. Welcome to our camp, Judge Gray, he said, his English perfect and unaccented. It has been many years since a Gray set foot on Blackfoot land. Thank you for your hospitality, Chief Redhawk, Elijah replied, matching the formality, and for your assistance. The chief's dark eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. I do this for my daughter, and for the white wolf who runs with our people. Not for you, Judge. Elijah swallowed hard, understanding the reference to Marcus immediately. I'm grateful nonetheless, he said quietly. Redhawk nodded, then turned to address his warriors in their native tongue. Immediately, the camp burst into activity, weapons being distributed. Canoes secured, women gathering children and elders toward the center of the encampment. My father has ordered the camp prepared for defense, Julia translated for Elijah and Sarah's benefit. Blackwood's men will hesitate to attack a Blackfoot camp directly, but they're desperate enough to try. Aha, we can't bring war to your people, Elijah protested. These men, they won't respect tribal boundaries or civilian status. The Blackfoot have been at war with white men's government for generations, Julia replied dryly. This is hardly new territory for us. Chief Redhawk approached again, this time, speaking directly to Julia in their shared language. She listened intently, then nodded. My father says we will escort you to the northern hunting grounds tonight under cover of darkness, she explained to Elijah and Sarah. From there, we can reach the Canadian border in 2 days' hard ride. Canada, Sarah repeated, alarmed. But the evidence we need to make it public, not flee the country. Anyway, Julia will explain how we use her connections through the Blackfoot tribe, especially her cousin with newspaper connections, to publicize everything while maintaining our safety. Elijah paused, addressing the chief directly. With respect, Chief Redhawk, we didn't come this far to run. We have evidence that could bring down corrupt officials who have been exploiting both your people and ours. The chief's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, interest perhaps, or skepticism. Show me this evidence. Elijah hesitated, glancing at Julia. She nodded almost imperceptibly, giving him permission to proceed. With careful hands, he withdrew Marcus's journal and several of the key documents from his satchel, offering them to the chief. Red Hawk accepted them with the reverence due important documents, his eyes scanning the pages with the practiced ease of a man well-versed in reading English. As he read, his expression darkened, the lines around his mouth deepening with anger. Weapons diverted from Union armories. He summarized, his voice dangerously soft. Sold to hostile tribes to provoke conflicts that justified military action. Land seized, treaties broken, all orchestrated by Blackwood and his conspirators. Yes, Elijah confirmed, somewhat surprised by the chief's quick grasp of the complex conspiracy. They prolonged the war for profit, armed enemies of both our peoples, and framed my brother when he discovered their scheme. Red Hawk looked up, his eyes boring into Elijah's. And you, what was your role in this, Judge? The question struck Elijah like a physical blow. I was deceived. He admitted, the words inadequate to convey the enormity of his mistake. I believed the evidence presented at Marcus's trial. I upheld what I thought was the law. He sentenced his own brother to death, Julia added bluntly, though he did try to save him afterward. The chief's gaze never wavered from Elijah's face. And now you seek to correct this mistake. If I can, Elijah replied honestly, though nothing will ever truly make it right. After a long evaluative silence, Red Hawk handed the documents back to Elijah. The White Wolf speaks of you sometimes, he said, his tone softening slightly. Always with anger, but also with grief. The bond between brothers is not so easily broken, even by betrayal. Hope flared in Elijah's chest, painful, unexpected hope. Have you seen him recently? Is he well? He has changed, the chief replied cryptically, but still living, still fighting. Before Elijah could press for more details, a commotion arose at the edge of the camp. Warriors were gathering, pointing toward the lake, where the distant figures of their pursuers could be seen organizing on the far shore. They're preparing boats, Julia reported, squinting against the setting sun. At least a dozen men. Then we prepare to meet them, Red Hawk declared, turning to issue orders to his warriors. As the camp mobilized for defense, Elijah found himself ushered into a large central teepee, along with Sarah and Emma. The interior was surprisingly spacious, furnished with furs and woven blankets that spoke of comfort, despite their frontier setting. You'll be safe here for now, Julia assured them, though her attention was clearly divided, part of her already focused on the coming conflict. My father's warriors are excellent shots, and they know these shores better than any white man. I should help, Elijah insisted. I can fight. You can protect them, Julia countered, nodding towards Sarah and Emma. That's more important right now. As she turned to leave, Elijah caught her arm. Julia, thank you for everything, for saving Marcus when I failed him. Something in his sincere gratitude seemed to penetrate the armor of resentment she had worn since their reunion. Her expression softened slightly, her dark eyes meeting his directly for perhaps the first time without anger. I didn't do it for you, she said quietly, but he is your brother, and despite everything, I think he misses you too. With that, she was gone, leaving Elijah to ponder her words as the sounds of preparation for battle intensified outside. Sarah settled Emma on a pile of soft furs, murmuring reassurances that the child clearly only half believed. Will there be more loud noises? Emma asked, her small voice tremulous. Like the thunder at the cabin. I don't know, sweetheart, Sarah answered honestly. But we're safe here. Julia and her father will protect us. Elijah knelt beside the child, withdrawing his carving knife from his pocket. "Would you like to learn more about carving while we wait?" he offered. "I think I saw some good pine branches outside the teepee." Emma's face brightened momentarily. "Can we make another wolf-a white one this time?" "We can certainly try," Elijah agreed, grateful for any distraction he could provide. He stepped outside briefly, returning with several promising branches that could be shaped into simple figurines. Night fell over Spirit Lake like a velvet curtain, the stars emerging one by one to reflect in its still waters. On the eastern shore, Blackwood's men had lit torches, their flames dancing like fireflies in the growing darkness. From the Blackfoot camp on the western shore, these lights looked deceptively beautiful, almost festive, if one didn't know the deadly purpose behind them. Elijah stood at the edge of the camp watching as the enemy prepared their assault. Beside him, Chief Redhawk studied the distant shore with the calculating eye of a seasoned warrior. "They will wait until full dark," the chief observed, "then cross in small boats hoping to surprise us?" "You seem very calm about this," Elijah remarked. Redhawk's weathered face creased in a brief smile. "This is not the first time white men have come to kill my people, Judge Gray. It will not be the last." I'm sorry," Elijah said quietly, "for my part in all of this, for bringing this danger to your camp." The chief glanced at him, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "You did not bring this danger, Judge. It has always been here since your people first came to our lands. The difference is that now you see it too." Before Elijah could respond, Julia approached, her silhouette distinctive, even in the dim light of the camp's carefully shielded fires. She had exchanged her marshal's coat for traditional Blackfoot attire, buckskin leggings, and a fringed hunting shirt that allowed for greater freedom of movement. "The women and children are being moved to the high caves," she reported, "including Sarah and Emma. They'll be safe there with guards." "Good!" Redhawk nodded, then addressed Elijah directly. "You should join them. This is not your fight." "With respect, Chief Redhawk, it is very much my fight," Elijah countered. "These men are here because of me, because of the evidence we carry. I won't hide while others face danger on my behalf." Julia and her father exchanged a look that Elijah couldn't quite interpret. Finally, the chief nodded. "As you wish, but remember, Judge Gray here, you are not a judge, not a lawman. You are a warrior, or you are nothing." With that cryptic admonition, Redhawk moved away to continue organizing the camp's defenses, leaving Elijah alone with Julia. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them filled with the sounds of preparation orders given in the Blackfoot language. Weapons being checked and distributed, the soft whicker of horses being moved to safety. "Your father doesn't think much of me," Elijah observed eventually. Julia snorted softly. "My father doesn't think much of most white men, especially those who wear a badge or sit behind a judge's bench." She paused, then added more seriously, "But he respects that you're still here, that you're willing to fight." "For what it's worth," Elijah said quietly. "It's worth something," Julia conceded, then changing the subject abruptly. "Come with me. There's something you should see before the fighting starts." Curious, Elijah followed as she led him away from the main camp, up a narrow trail that wound through the pine forest, climbing the steep hillside above the lake. They walked in silence, Julia, moving with the effortless grace of someone who knew these paths intimately, Elijah following more cautiously in the dim light. After about 15 minutes of steady climbing, they emerged onto a rocky outcropping that offered a commanding view of Spirit Lake and both shores. From this vantage point, Blackwood's forces looked small and insignificant pinpricks of torchlight against the vast dark landscape. But it wasn't the view that had brought them here. Standing at the edge of the outcropping, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, was a lone figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in Blackfoot attire similar to Julia's, with the addition of a wolf pelt draped over his shoulders, the animal's head forming a hood that concealed the man's features. Julia stopped a respectful distance away. "He's been waiting for you," she said softly. Elijah's heart hammered in his chest, his mouth suddenly dry. "Marcus," he whispered, hardly daring to believe. The figure turned slowly, lowering the wolf head hood to reveal a face that was both achingly familiar and utterly transformed. Marcus Gray. Older, harder, his once clean-shaven face now adorned with a neatly trimmed beard streaked with premature gray. A jagged scar ran from his right temple down to his jaw, puckering the skin slightly at the cheekbone. But it was the eyes that had changed the most, still the same shade of gray as Elijah's own, but now holding a depth of experience of pain and wisdom that made them seem to belong to a much older man. "Hello, brother," Marcus said, his voice deeper than Elijah remembered, with a slight rasp as if from disuse. "It's been a long time." Elijah stood frozen, a thousand emotions warring within him: joy, relief, guilt, fear. Words failed him entirely, his carefully rehearsed apologies and explanations evaporating like morning mist in the presence of the brother he had believed dead for 5 long years. Marcus's mouth quirked in a small sardonic smile, an expression so hauntingly familiar that it pierced Elijah to his core. "Nothing to say, Judge Gray. That's a first." "Marcus," Elijah finally managed, his voice cracking on the name. "You're alive." April, disappointed, Marcus asked the question, sharp-edged despite its casual delivery. "No." Elijah took an impulsive step forward, then halted when Marcus tensed almost imperceptibly. "God, no, I can't believe it. All these years I thought—" "You thought you'd sentence me to death," Marcus finished for him. "And you did, brother. The man you knew died that day on the gallows." He gestured to himself, to the scar, to the wolf pelt he wore. "What stands before you now is something else. The Blackfoot call me White Wolf. It's as good a name as any." Julia cleared her throat gently. "I'll leave you two to talk," she said, already retreating toward the path. "Don't kill each other. We need both of you alive tonight." With that, she was gone, melting into the shadows of the pine forest, with practiced ease, leaving the brothers alone on the outcropping. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of separation and unspoken accusations. "I tried to save you," Elijah finally said, his voice barely audible over the soft sighing of wind through the pines. "At the end, I switched the ammunition." "I know," Marcus replied, his expression unreadable in the dim starlight. "A convenient salve for your conscience, I'm sure." The words stung, but Elijah couldn't deny their truth. "I was wrong," he admitted. "About everything. About you. About the evidence. About the system I served." He took a deep breath. "I have no right to ask your forgiveness, Marcus, but I want you to know I'm trying to make it right, however I can." Marcus studied him for a long moment, his gaze penetrating in a way that reminded Elijah uncannily of Chief Redhawk. "Mashum, why? Because of the girl and her mother? Because of James Mitchell's evidence? Or because you finally realized that your precious justice system is as corrupt as the men who run it?" "All of it," Elijah answered honestly. "And because you're my brother. Because I failed you when you needed me most, and I have to live with that every day for the rest of my life." Something shifted in Marcus's expression, not softening exactly, but a subtle change that suggested Elijah's words had reached him on some level. He turned away, gazing out over the lake, where Blackwood's forces continued their preparations. "Did you find what was in the lodge?" he asked, his tone deliberately neutral. "Yes," Elijah confirmed. "Julia helped. The journal, the documents, it's all in my satchel. And Sarah Mitchell has recordings, phonograph cylinders, with conversations implicating Blackwood and the others." Marcus nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Then it wasn't all for nothing," he said quietly. 5 years of hiding, of watching from the shadows while they continued their crimes." "It's enough to bring them down," Elijah assured him. "All of them: Blackwood, Robert Mitchell, the senators and industrialists mentioned in your journal. We just need to get the evidence to the right people." "The right people," Marcus repeated, a bitter edge to his voice. "And who would those be, brother? The same government officials who looked the other way while Blackwood diverted weapons? The same courts that condemned me on fabricated evidence? The same newspapers that printed lies about me being a traitor?" Elijah had no easy answer to this. Marcus was right. The corruption ran deep, infecting every institution that should have served justice. "Julia mentioned her cousin at the Blackfoot Sentinel," he said finally. "And Sarah has connections in Chicago. It's a start." "A start," Marcus agreed, though he sounded less than convinced. "But first we have to survive the night." He gestured toward the enemy camp. "Blackwood's men are desperate. They know what we have. They'll kill everyone in the camp to get it back." "How many are there?" Elijah asked, slipping naturally into tactical discussion as they had so many times during the war. 20, maybe 25, Marcus replied. Well armed, some former military, others just hired guns. But they're on unfamiliar territory, and they don't know these waters. A grim smile touched his lips. And they don't know about me. And what's the plan? Elijah inquired, recognizing that whatever his own skills, Marcus and the Blackfoot clearly had the tactical advantage here. Red Hawk has positioned warriors around the lake, Marcus explained, pointing to locations Elijah could barely discern in the darkness. When Blackwood's men cross, they'll be caught in a crossfire from both shores. Those who make it to land will face the rest of us in the camp. It was a solid strategy, making good use of the natural terrain and the Blackfoot warriors' superior knowledge of the area. But something in Marcus's tone suggested there was more to it. And your role in this, Elijah pressed. Marcus's expression hardened. I've been hunting Blackwood for 5 years, brother. Tonight I intend to finish it. The cold determination in his voice sent a chill down Elijah's spine. This wasn't the idealistic younger brother he remembered, the brilliant engineer who had enlisted to serve his country with honor. This was a hunter, a predator shaped by betrayal and years living on the knife edge of survival. Marcus, Elijah began cautiously, we need Blackwood alive, to stand trial to answer for his crimes publicly. Like I answered for mine. Marcus shot back, his voice suddenly sharp with old anger. No, brother. There will be no trial for Governor Blackwood. No chance for him to use his connections, his wealth, his power to escape justice yet again. He touched the scar on his face, a gesture that seemed unconscious. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Elijah wanted to argue, to insist on the proper legal course, but the words died in his throat. What right did he have to lecture Marcus about justice, about proper procedure, when those very systems had failed so catastrophically, when he himself had been the instrument of that failure? I understand, he said instead, and was surprised to realize he meant it. But promise me one thing. Let the evidence come to light first. Let the world know what these men did, so that even if Blackwood escapes the hangman's noose, he can't escape the judgment of history. Marcus considered this, then nodded slightly. Fair enough. The truth first, then justice, real justice, not the kind dispensed by corrupt courts. He turned to face Elijah fully. Which brings me to why I wanted to see you tonight. Oh, Elijah asked, suddenly wary. I need to know where you stand, brother, Marcus said bluntly. Not just tonight against Blackwood's men, but after, when the evidence is public, when the men who framed me start to fall. His eyes, so like Elijah's own, bored into him with unsettling intensity. Will you see it through to the end, or will you flinch when it comes time to tear down the system you once served? It was the question Elijah had been asking himself since reading James Mitchell's letter, since learning the truth about Marcus's case. Could he truly turn against everything he had once believed in, once upheld? Could he become what Marcus now was, not a man of law, but a man of justice, whatever the cost? I will see it through, he promised, holding his brother's gaze steadily. All the way to the end, whatever it takes. I owe you that much. I owe it to James Mitchell, to Sarah and Emma, to everyone who suffered because I was too blind to see the corruption in front of me. Marcus studied him silently, as if weighing the truth of his words. Finally, he gave a slight nod. Then it's time to go back, he said, turning toward the path. They'll be crossing soon. As they descended toward the camp, moving silently through the dark forest, Elijah felt a curious sense of rightness, as if pieces of himself that had been scattered were slowly being gathered again. He was not forgiven, not yet, perhaps never. But he was on the path toward redemption, walking side by side with the brother he had wronged, united in purpose, if not yet in heart. They reached the camp to find it transformed. The fires had been extinguished, the teepees dismantled, every trace of human habitation concealed. In the darkness, Blackfoot warriors moved like shadows, taking up positions among the trees and rocks that lined the shore. Chief Red Hawk stood at the water's edge, flanked by Julia and several of his most trusted warriors, all armed and alert. They've launched the boats, Julia reported as Marcus and Elijah approached. 8 canoes, 3 men each. They'll reach our shore in about 20 minutes. Marcus nodded, already checking his weapons, a rifle slung across his back, a revolver at his hip, and a wicked-looking hunting knife strapped to his thigh. "Any sign of Blackwood himself?" "Not yet," Julia replied, "but Robert Mitchell is with them. I recognized him through the spyglass." A cold smile touched Marcus's lips. "Good. Two birds, one stone." Chief Red Hawk spoke quietly in his native tongue, addressing Marcus directly. Marcus responded in the same language, his pronunciation flawless to Elijah's untrained ear. The exchange continued for a moment, then concluded with a solemn nod from the chief. "What was that about?" Elijah asked as Red Hawk moved away to issue final instructions to his warriors. "He asked if I was sure about involving you in the fighting," Marcus translated bluntly. "He thinks your white man's conscience might make you hesitate at a critical moment." "And what did you tell him?" Marcus checked his revolver one final time before holstering it. "That you may be many things, brother, but you've never been a coward. And that when it comes to a fight, I'd rather have you at my back than most men I know." The unexpected vote of confidence caught Elijah off guard. Before he could respond, Julia pressed a rifle into his hands, a Winchester repeater, well maintained and loaded. "Try not to shoot any of our people," she advised dryly, "and stay close to Marcus. He knows what he's doing." With that, she melted into the darkness, heading toward her assigned position. Marcus gestured for Elijah to follow him to a rocky outcropping that offered good cover and a clear line of sight to the approaching boats. As they settled into position, the night fell completely silent. Even the usual chorus of insects and nocturnal birds seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the coming violence. On the lake, the dark shapes of the enemy canoes were now visible, moving steadily toward the western shore. No torches now, no lights of any kind, just shadows gliding across the star-dappled water. "When it starts, aim for the boats first," Marcus instructed, his voice barely a whisper. "Put them in the water if you can. Most of Blackwood's men aren't strong swimmers, especially not in the cold." Elijah nodded, sighting down the rifle's barrel, as he'd been taught long ago by their father. It had been years since he'd fired a weapon in anger, but the skills remained ingrained through the long months of war. "And if you see Blackwood or Mitchell," Marcus added, his tone hardening, "leave them to me." Time seemed to stretch as they waited, each second extending into an eternity of tension. Elijah could hear his own heartbeat steady and strong despite the danger. Beside him, Marcus was utterly still, a predator poised to strike. The enemy boats were close now, perhaps 50 yards from shore. In the darkness, Elijah could make out the silhouettes of the men aboard, some rowing, others with rifles ready. They moved with military precision, maintaining formation as they approached. From somewhere to their left came the distinctive cry of an owl, except Elijah knew it was no owl but a Blackfoot signal. Seconds later, the night erupted in gunfire. The first volley caught the attackers completely by surprise. Muzzle flashes lit up the shoreline as the Blackfoot warriors opened fire from their concealed positions. Men screamed, boats capsized, and chaos descended upon the lake. Elijah joined the fight, firing methodically at the nearest boat, watching with grim satisfaction as his shots splintered wood and sent men diving into the cold water. Beside him, Marcus fired with deadly accuracy, each shot finding its mark despite the darkness and confusion. 3 boats had already been disabled, their occupants floundering in the lake or floating face down in the still waters. But the others pressed on, returning fire and driving for the shore with increased urgency. "They're going to make it to land," Elijah observed, ejecting a spent cartridge and chambering a new round. "At least some of them." "That's the plan," Marcus replied calmly, taking aim at another boat. "Draw them in where we have the advantage." Sure enough, 2 of the canoes reached the shore, disgorging half a dozen men who immediately sought cover among the rocks and trees. The firefight intensified, bullets whizzing through the night air as both sides exchanged volleys. "There!" Marcus suddenly hissed, pointing to a tall figure directing the attackers from behind a large boulder. "Robert Mitchell!" Elijah squinted through the darkness, recognizing the distinctive silhouette of Sarah's brother-in-law, a man he had met briefly during the war at a military tribunal where Mitchell had testified against corrupt quartermasters. The irony was bitter indeed. "And there's Blackwood," Marcus added, nodding toward a second figure that had just landed from one of the surviving boats. "Time to move." Without waiting for a response, Marcus slipped away from their position, moving with the silent grace of the predator whose name he now bore. Elijah hesitated only a moment before following, staying low and using the terrain for cover as they circled toward the enemy's flank. The fighting had spread along the shoreline, the Blackfoot warriors gradually drawing the attackers into the forest, where their superior knowledge of the terrain gave them a decisive advantage. Screams and gunshots echoed through the trees, creating a chaotic backdrop to Marcus and Elijah's focused hunt. They came upon two of Blackwood's men setting up a firing position behind a fallen log. Marcus dispatched them with ruthless efficiency, a knife across one throat, a point-blank shot to the other's chest. Elijah swallowed his instinctive revulsion at the cold brutality of it. This was war, not a courtroom. Different rules applied. Moving deeper into the forest, they tracked their primary targets by sound, Blackwood's distinctive voice issuing commands Mitchell's responses. The two men had separated from their main force, apparently heading for higher ground, where they could direct the assault more effectively. Or perhaps Elijah realized they were simply trying to escape, abandoning their hired guns to cover their retreat. It would be consistent with everything he now knew about these men, their cowardice, their willingness to sacrifice others to save themselves. "This way," Marcus whispered, pointing toward a narrow game trail that wound up the hillside. "They're heading for the ridgeline, probably have horses stashed somewhere." They followed cautiously, aware that they were now beyond the main battlefield and potentially vulnerable to ambush. The sounds of fighting grew more distant behind them, suggesting the Blackfoot warriors were gradually prevailing against the remaining attackers. The trail steepened, forcing them to use their hands to climb in some places. Loose rocks clattered down the slope, warning their quarry of pursuit. Ahead, they heard voices, urgent, argumentative. "Can't just leave them," Mitchell was saying, his tone indignant. "Those are our men back there." "They're hired guns, nothing more," came Blackwood's dismissive reply. "Their job is to buy us time to escape with our lives." "Now move, damn you!" Marcus and Elijah exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. These were the men who had orchestrated a conspiracy that had cost countless lives, that had torn apart families, that had nearly destroyed the fragile peace following the war. Men who viewed others as expendable, as mere tools to advance their own power and wealth. "Shall we introduce ourselves, brother?" Marcus asked, a cold smile playing at his lips. Elijah nodded, feeling a righteous anger burn through his veins. "After you." They emerged onto a small plateau where Blackwood and Mitchell stood arguing beside a crude lean-to containing their emergency supplies, and as Marcus had predicted, two saddled horses tethered and ready for a quick escape. "Going somewhere, Governor?" Marcus called out, stepping into the open with his rifle leveled. Blackwood froze, his face paling in the dim starlight as he recognized the voice, if not immediately the face. "Gray," he whispered, disbelief evident in his tone. "Impossible. You're dead." "Not quite," Marcus replied, advancing slowly, "though not for lack of trying on your part." Mitchell had already drawn his pistol, but Elijah's voice stopped him before he could fire. "I wouldn't, Robert," he advised, emerging from the shadows, with his own weapon trained on Mitchell's chest. "Not if you want to live to see morning." "Judge Gray." Mitchell acknowledged his aristocratic features, twisting with contempt. "I should have known you'd be mixed up in this. Always were soft on traitors, even before it was your own brother." "The only traitors here are you and Blackwood," Elijah countered evenly. "We have the evidence, Robert, all of it. Your weapons, deals, your bribes, your fabricated testimony against Marcus. It's over." "Shatter." Blackwood, recovering from his initial shock, adopted an expression of calculated reasonableness. "Now, gentlemen, surely we can discuss this like civilized men. Whatever grievances you believe you have—" "Shut up!" Marcus cut him off coldly. "You lost the right to negotiate when you framed me for treason, when you had James Mitchell killed for discovering the truth. I had nothing to do with Mitchell's death." Blackwood protested, though his eyes darted nervously between the brothers. "That was an unfortunate robbery gone wrong." "More lies," Marcus interrupted, taking another step forward. "Always more lies. But they end tonight, Governor." Mitchell, sensing the deadly intent in Marcus's voice, made a desperate play. "The evidence won't matter without us to testify," he argued quickly. "Kill us, and you'll never prove the conspiracy in court. It will be your word, the word of a convicted traitor, against the official record." It was a calculating move, appealing to what Mitchell assumed was Elijah's lingering respect for legal procedure. But Elijah had changed more than the man realized. "We don't need your testimony," Elijah informed him calmly. "We have James's recordings. We have financial records. We have sworn statements from witnesses you thought were dead or bought off. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. In fact, gentlemen, you're both entirely expendable at this point. Fear flashed across both men's faces as they realized the precariousness of their position. Mitchell, ever the pragmatist, changed tactics instantly. I can give you names, he offered urgently. Men higher up than us, senators, cabinet members. The conspiracy goes deeper than you know. Marcus laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed in the night air. Do you think we don't already have those names? My journal documents everything, Robert. Every meeting, every deal, every participant. His voice hardened. Including your order to have me executed before I was even accused of any crime. What do you want? Blackwood asked, naked desperation now evident in his voice. Money safe passage out of the territory. Name your price. Justice, Marcus replied simply. Something your corrupt courts couldn't provide. He raised his rifle, and in that moment Elijah saw the full extent of his brother's transformation from the idealistic young engineer to this implacable instrument of vengeance. It was a mirror of his own journey from blind adherent of the law to seeker of true justice by whatever means necessary. But before Marcus could fire, a woman's voice rang out from the trees behind them. Wait! All four men turned to see Sarah Mitchell emerging from the shadows, her face pale but determined in the starlight. Behind her came Julia Redhawk, a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. Sarah! Robert Mitchell's voice cracked with shock. What are you doing here? Bearing witness, Sarah replied, her gaze hard as she faced her brother-in-law. For James, for all the men who died because of your greed.